What's up guys, I'm Andy from 1A Auto. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear knuckle on this 2010 Toyota Rav4. If you need parts for your vehicle, click the link in the description and head over to 1aauto.com. I'm going to pull this wheel off. I'm going to use a 21mm socket and an air gun. If you don't have an air gun, you can use a breaker bar. Just break the lug nuts free while the vehicle's still on the ground. Take the wheel off. I want to take the wheel speed sensor out, so I'm going to use a 10mm socket and a ratchet. Take this bolt out right here. That bolt out, try to grab the sensor, wiggle it, and sometimes they'll pull right out. If you struggle a little bit, just take a pair of pliers and just wiggle it out. Then I want to pull the wiring harness out of the way, so I'm going to take the nuts off right here. There's a bracket that holds the wiring on, and then there's two other brackets on this upper control arm. So take those off with the same 10mm socket and a ratchet. Loosen that up. Pull that out. And then pull these two off. And I'm just removing this so that I don't put too much tension on the wiring harness, because you don't want to break the wiring harness. And actually, if you're pulling this arm out, you have to take these off anyway. Slide that out. Just remember the way that the wiring harness was routed. Then we can set this over here, set it aside. I'm just going to use a little rust penetrant right here on this nut, on the bolt a little bit. I'm going to use a 17mm wrench, just put it on the nut on that side, and then a 17mm socket and air gun on this side. If you don't have an air gun, just use a breaker bar. And we're going to loosen this up. I got the nut off, which is good. I'm going to try to take this bolt out. Might have to push on this area. You might need a pry bar to get this out. And I'm going to use a long punch right here and just tap that bolt through. Just try not to be too close to this area when you're taking this out, just in case it kicks back on you. Just use a 17mm socket and a ratchet. Should be able to unscrew it the rest of the way. While I'm pulling on it, giving it a little bit of force. It's just a little bit rusty, that's why it doesn't slide out too smooth. Now I should be able to take a pry bar, just pry this out. You can take a hammer and just give it a little tap. Slide that out like that. Now I'm going to take this caliper off. Now you could have taken this caliper off before you disconnected this, or either way. So, but at this point we'll take this off. I'm going to use a 17mm socket and a ratchet, and then I'm just taking off the bolts at the bracket. I'm not going to separate the caliper from the bracket. Loosen those up. And then same with the bottom one. Loosen those up, then I'll use my electric ratchet. Take those bolts out. Just grab the caliper. I like to go back and forth with it, and then that compresses the piston a little bit. Take a caliper hanger and try to slide it however you can. And we're going to hang this from the actual spring. Twist this around this way. Just like that. It's just going to hang there. Just make sure there's no tension on the actual brake caliper hose. We can grab the rotor, slide it off. If your rotor's rusted on there, you can take a hammer and just hit in these locations. Just be careful of the studs. All right, I want to remove this nut. What I'm going to do is use a punch. What it is they hammer this down, this section, so that the nut doesn't loosen up on you. So just use a punch. Just try to reform it so that you can loosen it. And use a little rust penetrant on there. And I'll use a 30mm socket. It is a 12-point socket. We actually sell this at oneauto.com, and I'll use an air gun. If you don't have an air gun, you can use a breaker bar. You just want to make sure you support the wheel bearing from spinning, so you're going to have to use a pry bar in there. And generally, if you drop it down to the ground, you can have the ground hold the pry bar while you loosen it up. Now that axle is loose, which is good. If it wasn't, I'd just give it a little tap with a hammer on there. Make sure you don't mess up the threads on the end. I'm gonna take these wheel bearing bolts out. I'm gonna use a 14mm socket and a ratchet. Take these out. There's 4 of those. There we go. This bottom one, I just need a extension to access it. All right. If you need to, you can use a breaker bar. That's the last bolt. All right. I'm gonna use a slide hammer, so I'm just gonna set this bracket up on here. You could try to tap this with a hammer if you don't have a slide hammer. Just the shoes are gonna be in your way. If you wanna go the extra mile and take the shoes off and do that, but that's a lot more work that you don't need to do. Just check and see if it's sliding out. There we go. That was easy. All right, I want to take this nut off right here. I'm going to use a 22mm socket and a breaker bar. Loosen this up. So to prevent this backing shield from moving, I'm just going to take a couple of those bolts that go through for the hub assembly. Put those in this way, or right here and right there. That'll prevent this from spinning. Now I can take that nut off a little easier. Now I can take this bolt out a little easier. All right, and then slide that nut off. Pull that bolt out, and then you can just grab this whole backing shield, slide it out. You can slide it out of the way. We can leave all that parking brake assembly all intact, then we don't have to do extra work. I'm going to take this bolt out so that the parking brake cable will get out of our way. So use a 10mm socket and a ratchet. Loosen this up. And just let that hang right there. I'm going to use a screw jack and support under this lower control arm. I'm just going to put it back here so then it doesn't slip out. You could put it over here, or if you have a floor jack, you're going to want to support this. Just take the tension off. Now I'm going to take this bracket off right here. Now this bracket, actually one of the bolts is broken, so there's only one bolt in here, so I have to take that bolt off. Now I'm going to use a 17mm socket and a breaker bar. Take this bolt out. Hopefully this one doesn't break. Although it feels like it's going to break. I'm going to use an air gun. There we go. All right, so we took that one bolt out. and there's where the other bolt is broken. So we're actually going to replace this whole knuckle, and that's why we're replacing it. Now we potentially could drill this out, but a lot of times it takes you a lot of effort, a lot of time, and sometimes it's not worth it because it ends up not being right when you're done anyway. So we'll just replace it. Now that that's off, you can just twist this bracket out of the way. Just leave that there. I'm actually going to lower down the control arm. And it's nice and loose. The spring is loose in there, so it's not going to be dangerous to work on. Should be good. Just going to spray right here. I'm going to spray right here while I'm there. And then these two. There we go. Let those soak. Use a 17mm socket and an air gun. There we go. You might have to push this down a little bit. Slide that bolt out. Okay, push this up a little bit. Now we can access this nut right here with a extension and an air gun. All right, take this nut out. Just like that. All right, I'm gonna separate this little bar. This has a ball and socket type joint on there. So you can use a ball joint remover, or you can use some type of fork or something. So we'll remove that. Just be careful when you're doing this. There we go. Got that to break free. Okay, with that loose, what I'm gonna do now is take this bracket down. I'm not gonna take this bolt out here. We'll leave that in there, but we'll take these 3 bolts out right here. I'm just gonna use a 17mm socket, extension, and an air gun. Loosen that one up. Put that one up. And then I just want to support this as I take this last one out. All right, got that last bolt out. Now we can just take this whole piece and just slide it off. Now I'm going to take a 22mm socket, take both these bolts out, use an air gun. Same with this one. And we'll just set this aside. Just like that. And there's our bracket, or our knuckle. All right, now we want to attach the knuckle, the new one, to this trailing arm. So just line this up just like this. Now I'm going to tighten this with the 22mm socket and the gun. If you have the ability to torque this, you're going to want to torque these to 147 foot-pounds. All right, you could put it in a vise and torque it like this, 147. So there we go. 147 foot-pounds. All right, now we're just gonna take this, slide it over the axle. Then we wanna make sure we slide this tow bar ball and socket through there, the stud. Get this all lined up. And take the bolts. Try to get these bolts started right here. Might help if you have a friend holding this while you get the bolt started. Or you could even support it on a floor jack. I'll take a 17mm socket and an air gun. I'm just gonna snug these up. I'm just gonna double check these bolts, make sure they're tight. I'm just gonna use a 17mm socket and a breaker bar, snug them up. Those are good. Right. Now I'm gonna take the nut for this ball stud. For that's for the tow bar right there, and get that started. So I'm gonna take a 17mm socket extension and my air gun, and I'm just gonna snug this up real quick. Hopefully the stud doesn't spin. Alright, that was good that didn't spin. Now I'm going to use a 17mm socket and a ratchet and a torque wrench, and I'm going to torque this nut to 74 foot-pounds. There we go. And if this stud was spinning while you were trying to tighten that down, what you can do is take some big pliers and try to hold these together, and that will sometimes prevent the stud from spinning if you do that. All right, I do want to attach this bolt next, but before I do that, I just want to position the shock in the right position with this bracket. So just get that there. I'm not going to attach that yet. Let's attach this first. I'm going to use a pole jack to raise up the lower control arm. It's going to compress the spring a little bit. All right, so you want to be careful. You don't want to put your fingers through there or anything. So we can just take a screwdriver, just pry down right on the end. Just get all this to line up. All right, I'm just going to pry this out a little bit. I kind of want to try to angle this if possible. All right, I'm just going to take a thicker screwdriver, try to angle this a little bit. There we go. So try to get it to the right angle that you want. That looks good. Now I'm going to take a new bolt. It's recommended that you replace the bolt, but if you have to reuse the old one, you can. Now I'm going to take a 17mm socket and an air gun. Just get that started. What it's recommended is that you put all this back together, put the wheel on, and then torque this with a torque wrench when the vehicle is on the ground, but it's very hard to get that correct. So what we're going to do is we're just going to torque it now. Just get the lower control arm as close to ride height as possible, and then you should be good to go. Now I'm going to torque this bolt with a 17mm socket and a torque wrench to 66 foot-pounds. That's good. Right, now we want to line this shock bracket up. Now if you have to loosen up this nut and bolt, you can, to make it a little bit easier. I think I'm just going to raise this up a little bit more. All right, get this lined up. Take one of those bolts with a 17mm socket. Get that started. Get this one started. Now I'm just going to take an air gun and extension 17mm socket. Just snug these up. Torque wrench, torque these bolts to 59 foot-pounds. At this point, you could attach this upper control arm. We're going to do this in a different order. I'm going to put this backing shield on and the brakes and the hub and all that stuff together, and then we're going to attach this. But if you're doing this at home, ideally attach this now. Now I'm going to take this backing plate. Now there's that stud that goes through that hole there. Get that lined up like that. And I am going to take the hub, slide that in position. We are replacing the hub. You could put a little high temp anti-seize on some of these components to keep them from rusting up. Yeah, that's good. Now I'm going to start some of these bolts for the hub. Get those started first. Let's use a 14mm socket to help get these bolts on. Get those lined up. Right, now I'm just going to take a electric ratchet, tighten these up. Now I'm going to torque these to 66 foot-pounds, the 14mm socket. For the bottom one, I have to use an extension because you can't really get to it. And the top one, it's a little bit easier to use the extension as well on the front side. There we go. Take the axle nut, reinstall the axle nut. It's a good idea to replace these if you have one, but if not, reuse the old one. Then I'm going to use a 30mm socket, 12 point, and an air gun, and I'm just going to get this started. Now I'm going to take that same 30mm socket, torque wrench, and I'm using a pry bar to go in between the studs to prevent the hub from spinning. And you can always lower the vehicle and have the pry bar sitting on the ground. There we go, 159 foot-pounds. So it's a little bit safer if you go down to the ground and just have this pry bar sitting on the ground and torque it. Then with that nut, what we want to do is take a punch and just go right here with a punch and a hammer and just pin down the edge of the nut so that it won't loosen up. You just gotta mushroom it down a little bit and that should be good. I'm going to reinstall this nut. This nut goes to the backing plate, or dust shield. Sometimes you call it a dust shield. Get that started. I'll just take a 22mm socket and a ratchet and tighten it up. And just snug that up. That's good. I'll reinstall this bracket bolt right here. Take a 10mm socket and a ratchet. Tighten that up. Snug. That's good. Now we'll install the rotor. And I'm gonna take one lug nut and just get that one started. Just to hold the rotor on, just make it easier to install the brakes. Now I'll take the caliper hanger off and reinstall the caliper. With the brake pads, just make sure the brake pads are still in there properly. If not, you're gonna have to take this apart. Line that up. Install these bolts, caliper bolts. Now I'll take a 17mm socket and a torque wrench and torque those bolts to 65 foot-pounds. So I just moved the screw jack out a little bit. If you have your floor jack, you could raise it up from over here. Just be careful, you don't want this to slip off. I'm just gonna raise this up so that it's easier to attach the upper control arm. Just pry this over a little bit and pry it down, get it lined up. All right, so that's pretty good. This right here, I'm just gonna take a pick, just try to get this over a little bit. If you can get it from the back side, it would be better. because we're going to send the bolt through this front. Okay, once you can access it on this side, use another pick. I'll just use a straight pick. That's good. Now we just need the bolt. Grab the bolt, just wiggle this around. There we go. Just get the bolt started. It's a little bit easier. And it's just gonna come down a little. There we go. Got the bolt in. At this point, I can lower this. To actually torque this bolt, what you want to do is have the suspension where it would be normally. They recommend putting the tire on and tightening that down now, but that's obviously very difficult, so we're just going to torque it in this position. Take the nut, get the nut started. So we're going to use a 17mm wrench and a 17mm socket and a torque wrench, and I'm going to torque this bolt to 66 foot-pounds. And it's recommended you torque the bolt side, not the nut side on this vehicle. Normally you torque the nut side. And that's good. All right, now I can lower the rear suspension. All right, take the ABS sensor or wheel speed sensor. Slide that bracket in there, like that. This bracket goes down here. And then you want to feed this wire through here, just like that. And that bracket's going to go like this. Now before we install that into the knuckle, we'll put the nuts on. Get that one started, get this one started, and the last one. This goes on the back side of this arm right here. Take a 10mm socket and a ratchet, and just snug these up. Now take the sensor side and slide it in position on the knuckle. Take the bolt, get that started. Take a 10mm socket and a ratchet and tighten this down. Just snug it up. That's good. Now we can take the lug nut off and put the wheel back on. Now slide the wheel on over the lug studs and put the lug nuts on. I'm just snugging these up loosely, then I'm going to lower the vehicle and use a torque wrench to torque these. Torque this using a 21mm socket and a torque wrench. I'm torquing this to 76 foot-pounds in a star pattern. The reason I do it in a star pattern is so that the wheel gets tightened down evenly. And I'll just go around again just to make sure, confirm everything's good.
Thanks for watching. Visit 1AAuto.com for quality auto parts shipped to your door, the place for DIY auto repair. And if you enjoyed this video, please click the subscribe button.